I am Brian Mullins, CEO of Mind Foundry. We were founded by Professor Steve Roberts and Mike Osborne from the University of Oxford, and we focus on important applications of AI. That's high-stakes applications that affect the lives of individuals. I'm joined by two great panelists today. First, my colleague, Dr. Alessandra Tosi. She's a senior research scientist at Mind Foundry, an expert in Bayesian optimization and probabilistic machine learning. She leads a range of government projects in the sector of energy and sustainability. And throughout her career, she's focused on pushing the boundaries of AI with a passion for the importance of ethics and moral considerations in bringing AI to real-world problems. Welcome, Ali.
Thanks, Brian.
I'm also joined today by Albert King, who is the Chief Data Officer for the Scottish Government and is responsible for data and digital identity. Throughout his career, he's worked in a vast range of sectors, including financial services, logistics, healthcare, and the public sector to support the effective use of data and analytics across the Scottish Government. He's helped to foster innovation and create policy and create a strategy for the Scottish Government and the use of AI, which we will talk more about in this panel. Welcome, Albert.
Hi, Brian.
So as we get started, I wanted to start off with the story of how we came to work together. And that started through a challenge in the CivTech program in Scotland on the explainable and ethical use of AI. And from a Mind Foundry perspective, we were very excited with the work that you were doing because of our focus on explainability throughout a system. So not just explainability for experts in the field of AI, but explainability also for the people who use the systems and ultimately for the citizens whose lives are affected by the decisions of those systems. But I think it might be really helpful for anyone in the audience to also know a little bit about the CivTech program, because when it comes to AI and it comes to emerging technology, the ability to work with government is just as important as the project itself and helping young companies to navigate. So Albert, maybe you could give a brief overview of that program and its goals to frame up the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess if you're not familiar with CivTech, their mission is to no less than to drive daring and innovation in the public sector by collaboratively solving challenges that make people's lives better, to transform Scotland with the best public services in the world. So that program really approaches kind of procurement and innovation in the public sector in a very different way than we would traditionally do. And as in this case, develops, encourages people in the public sector to come forward with challenges that we then release really to invite people from industry, from academia, really from wherever, to come forward with solutions and with new ideas and new ways of thinking about those challenges. And so when we were approaching this question that you've described there, Brian, about explainability, and not just in a technical sense, but how do we meaningfully explain how decisions are made and how those decisions propagate through systems, not just to technologists, but also to workers and people who are affected by decisions. CivTech seemed like a really good way to develop that thinking and that approach through real world use cases, really. And so a great vehicle for doing that. And very much in the spirit of the kind of agile approach, adaptive approach we're taking to strategy as well. And I should say, to finish off, just give a plug for CivTech 6. So there are a new tranche of challenges were just released there on Monday. So Google CivTech and find out more.
Well, that's excellent, and we've had a great experience, and would definitely encourage anyone to look into that as well. And so based on that program, we did some interesting work together. But I think I want to start at the high level today, and let's talk about what could go wrong. And Alessandra, maybe you could start certainly from the level of the technology and how through the interactions of the technology and the system, what could go wrong?
Yes, there's many things that can go wrong when you build a system that involves data, particularly data that are constantly changing and being updated. Something can go wrong at the very first step when you feed your new system with data. If this data, for example, if the data collection step has not been well thought, maybe you can introduce what we call bias in the system through the data. Can be of many types, this bias, but maybe you can already start with the system that is being fed and is learning information from data that are not well collected, and this can introduce some problems. And that is at the very first step, but you can have problems even, let's say that you set up a system which has been fed with the correct or appropriate data or fair and unbiased data. Things are evolving in time. We know that these systems have to be released in the real life, in the society where things are constantly changed and data are updated. And there might be the case that the system is no longer suitable for the new changes that are happening, so it's not up to date, and you might not notice that. So it's very important that your system is built keeping in mind that you need to monitoring and make sure that systems are always up to date with the changes that might happen in the outside world or in the data or in the society in general.
Excellent. And building on that and really thinking about the work we did, we looked at how getting that right is important because of the journey when you interact with the government. And if that bias is introduced at the first point of contact, even in something that looks from the outside like a simple automation task, that can define the next steps for you. And these steps in these systems and services that the government offers and delivers for the citizens, that first impression, that digital first impression, can have tremendous impact. And so there's another piece, Albert, that extends from there, and that is, what we refer to as the direction of the intervention. What steps do you take as a result of the system? And so when you think about it from the government's perspective, and you think about what could go wrong, Albert, you must have a great perspective on really just what that could lead to and the responsibility that comes with it. Yeah,
I mean, like you say, Brian, we take that responsibility really seriously, and I suppose underlying it, like lots of other technologies, AI can be applied in undesirable ways, and there are pretty unfortunate examples of that. And I think it can also be, though, applied in brilliant, well-intentioned ways which go wrong, which I think is where some of Ali's comments come in about how we actually apply this technology. So we're really alive to all of that, and I think you've rehearsed those risks really well there, Ali. Those issues about understanding data and bias, lack of diversity in teams, lack of visibility about how AI is offering insights, and the risk that amplifies and entrenches social divides and entrenches simulation. I think possibly as well, I venture to say at a conference like this, there's maybe a bit of a sense that these technologies are somehow magical as well. And I think there's something about the expectations that sit around AI in the public discourse. And I think that's true not just amongst those that we're providing solutions for, but even actually amongst practitioners. So I think there's really a need for a deeper understanding of the true potential of AI, if you like. I mean, there are certainly examples. It's always difficult giving examples, isn't it? Because you don't want to be. It's a sensitive issue, but I think there are examples of all of that playing out. There was one you may have heard of it from a university in the US about predicting criminality using image processing based on a photograph of somebody's face. And I think it's a really good example of a deeply worrying application that can emerge if we don't consider these issues really, really carefully at every stage as we develop and adopt these technologies. That said, actually, it was also a good, encouraging example to see a strong response from the wider AI research community that recognized those issues and really sought to amplify those messages really around the risks. So I think, I think there's cause for concern, but there's also cause for optimism, I guess, in this space.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a great story to really focus on how high the stakes can be. Alessandra, from a technology standpoint, in a case like that, using facial recognition, looking at an image of someone to detect criminality, maybe give your quick impression of that. And is that possible? Is that responsible? And we all know the answer is no, but tell us why.
Well, there's many aspects of this in this question. One is the pure technology and tools aspect. What are the tools available from a technology side, and how are these tools assessed? I would say that's the and evaluated. Tools are algorithms that are classifiers that are trying to detect matching two images. And these tools are not bad per se. Image recognition is a tool that can be useful in many applications, but is the way this tool is assessed and then used that might be flawed and might have some problems. So are we sure that when we train our algorithms, so when we teach our algorithm how to do this classification, how to perform this recognition, we are doing it in an unbiased and objective way? That's very unlikely, because we do need to pick a selection of images to train our algorithm on, and we do need to provide a selection of what they are the so-called labels. So we have to train the algorithm by telling the algorithm which things we think are the criminals already, so the algorithm can learn from that. And one of the major flaws of this can be, as we can imagine, we might train it on an already biased data set where humans have created biased data set by, for example, arresting a certain category of people as opposed to arresting the population in general. So we might be perpetuating the bias that is already the human bias we do have when we start the task or we start designing the task. So that's a very big risk. And also the fact that it's really very difficult to have a metric to evaluate how correct is this classification or this recognition, how correct is performing, a metric that is reflecting our actual ethical concerns and societal needs. So that's very tricky. Not only a third aspect, I would say, is the interpretability and transparency of this tool. So why a specific judgment, a specific decision has been taken by the algorithm, why these two faces have been matched, or why this person has been judged to be a criminal from this image. And it's very tricky to extract interpretable and transparent results from this algorithm. So how do we recognize a false positive from a correct classification? So that's very difficult, and this question don't have an answer yet. So that's why it's a risk to deploy these algorithms in a context where these questions are really important, where the ethics and the societal concerns of the outcomes are more important than the efficiency of the process itself.
Absolutely, and I think it's an important takeaway that when you're talking about using AI in applications with lower stakes, it's easy to get drawn in by what may be possible and to try it out. But when it comes to the lives of individuals that are going to be affected by the decisions and the intervention that happens based on that result, you can't afford to get it wrong. It's not like playing a game of chess where you can afford to lose 2 billion games of chess. You have to make this decision right the first time and every time because of the stakes. Yes. And this is great. And so when we think about our collaboration and the issues we're able to explore, one of the things that was the backbone of it was the Scottish AI strategy. And so I think this is probably a good segue into talking a little bit about what led up to the Scottish AI strategy. And What AI were you using before that? What was the catalyst, and what does the future look like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of what led up to the development strategy, Brian, I think fundamentally it was a recognition of the need to act, driven by, an understanding that AI offers great opportunities for our society, but only if we adopt those technologies in ways which address some of the risks, that we've been discussing. And actually thinking back to as far as November 2019, Parliament held a debate on AI, which really recognised that. And AI, there was something that our Cabinet Secretary said, that AI is already in our lives and our homes, and it's here to stay. And data-driven technologies more broadly are having an increasingly large impact on almost all aspects of our activity and our society and our economy. So we cannot afford to ignore them, or indeed the opportunities or challenges that they bring. And I think that means that it's not an option to ignore the fact that these technologies are coming. We have to. The vital thing is about the way we approach adoption and put people at the heart of how we do that. And that was the spirit really in which we embarked on developing the AI strategy. And the process of developing it really reflected that. We had fantastic leadership from our Cabinet Secretary for Finance that brought together expertise from industry, academia, civil society, and public bodies, but also despite having to adapt a number of ways in the face of events that have happened since November 2019, we carried out a really broad range of public consultation, public engagement activities, which drew together as well working groups and experts that helped us to address these issues. And I think I'll finish off just by saying that we're carrying that approach forward into the way that we implement our strategy. So the collective leadership that we've established through our AI Alliance, establishing ongoing public dialogue and engaging across the AI ecosystem. And in doing that, recognizing very much that these are shared challenges. So these are challenges, I guess, that we're facing into not just in Scotland, but around the UK and around the world. And there are others who share our values, and we're very keen to learn, share, and contribute to how we approach responsible adoption of AI.
That's excellent, and I'd actually like to dig into a couple of the things you said, particularly about the public dialogue and its value. But I'm going to pause that and come back, because I'd like to have a little bit of fun off the back of that answer. When I watched the Twitter account for the cogX event, they actually advertised the panel as "Should AI run a country?" And so I'd like to ask that question as well. We'll start with you, Albert, and then we'll I'll follow up and ask you as well, Alec.
Yeah, so that's certainly a provocative one, isn't it? I mean, I guess AI can do many things, but I'm not sure it can run a country fit for human beings to live in. I suppose it's probably my take on that. I think, I said earlier, I think there's almost a tendency sometimes to elevate AI almost to a magical status. And I think there are really just fundamentally, there are some things that it cannot and should not do. And, Alessandra was explaining some of those. So I think, it can empower us, it can automate mundane tasks, it can help make better decisions, but it cannot displace human agency. And it's vital that we protect those things that, are fundamentally important in our society. Like I say, not sure it can run a country that's fit for human beings to live in. I think probably my summary of that.
Good. And now, obviously, there is a lot of talk and maybe hope or even a religion about the idea of a superintelligence, an AI model that's so complex it becomes self-aware. The truth is probably closer to your response, Albert, as to the limitations and understanding how they fit in. But I think that there is a pretty compelling case to be made that the superintelligences that have existed in the world today are large organizations like governments, where individual agents are working together on a collective set of goals and objectives with resources that can be applied on behalf of them. And so those people working together begin to look like a superintelligence. Alessandra, from a technology standpoint, maybe go the other way. What could we do to make AI run a government?
Yes, we I think that one of the powers of let me phrase it, a lot of powers comes with knowledge, and definitely a lot of power came into the hands of those who have the knowledge. The knowledge can be in the form of data, and we have seen recently technology advances that really push the boundaries to data sharing and knowledge sharing, and that has given a lot of power to individuals, to organizations, and even governments. And maybe we could revisit how to connect everyone, extract knowledge, and create positive outcomes out of that. And maybe that could be the super intelligence we want to build. Revisit the goal of us connecting together and us putting together all our knowledge and data for what we believe is the greatest good. And sometimes this greatest good is overseen or not known or not defined. So yeah, all times come together and all the village and make things better. But this might be at the country scale or even world scale if you want.
Yeah, that feels right. It feels like if we take a step back and look at the potential of our organizations, our governments to act as a superintelligence, let's add AI in a way that the humans can collaborate with the AI, the humans and the humans can collaborate together, and you can create a system where they all do what's best. So thanks for indulging the tangent there, but coming back to creating the Scottish AI strategy, the first of the two questions I have is about the public dialogue. Because if we're talking about an organization where you have brilliant people of all types, that includes the citizens. They're not just passive. They are what makes up a country, and not just a consideration, but they have to be involved. Albert, how did you find that process? How did you make room for the public dialogue, and what did you learn?
So first of all, at a practical level, it was certainly a different experience given the fact that we had to do everything remotely thanks to COVID. But fortunately, it didn't really stop us. It took slightly longer than we had anticipated, but it didn't stop us really taking a very deliberative approach to engaging with every part of society around some of these questions about, how do we adopt AI in Scotland in a way which is responsible. And I think the thing that I found pretty encouraging about that was that there were some fairly consistent messages through both the public dialogue actually and the public consultation that people did recognise the challenge and risks. They also recognised that AI is already a feature of their lives, but they were also really optimistic about the potential if we do this, if we adopt AI in a way which is responsible, is trustworthy, ethical, and inclusive. So I think it demonstrates, very clearly how good quality public engagement, public dialogue can help us to make better policy, can help us to make better AI. I think the other thing that came through really clearly was the appetite for a meaningful and sustained public dialogue. So that's now one of the things that we're building into the way we take forward the work of the AI Alliance, is that continued engagement through what we're describing as the community circle that brings people together around that. I think maybe the final thing I'll say, because I think that is a real strength of our approach. I think the final thing I'll say is that, as data professionals, and this maybe comes more to your point as well, Brian, that we really need to be engaged with, to engage with a range of issues and questions that aren't necessarily part of our core skill set. And I think government can help here. And I think, as well as that ongoing public dialogue through the AI Alliance, for example, I think building an infrastructure of public engagement which can empower those who are building or deploying solutions to engage those who may be affected by those decisions is one of the really important things that we can do as we take forward on the work on the strategy. So I think there's a number of dimensions to this built around the strategic sort of issues, but also the the use cases that people will be applying AI to.
And so when you think about engaging the public, my second question was, how do you handle cultural differences, and how do you think about you know, the differences in populations and in groups, and there's a larger question around across nations and how there's a different understanding of social norms and even ethics itself, which a lot of very intelligent people for thousands of years have been trying to understand. And you know, how do we think about that? How do we think about the human outcomes and bias in the system? And maybe the real question is, can we objectively remove bias from an AI system? And that's for both of you.
I can pick that one first. Straight answer, I don't think we can remove bias from an AI system altogether. And even if we might be able to remove some bias, then the system will be evolving, the data fed to the system will be evolving, and there's going to be more bias coming in. So what is really important is that we do build the right tools to keep monitoring our system and being able to detect when this bias is and when something goes wrong. Say that, there is a very first step that it's really tricky and I don't think we have solved, is to define what's right and wrong. And from a technology perspective, to define metrics to assess if our system is behaving well or not. And this is something that has to be done at the very first step and revisited through time and involving in the conversation of what is right and what's wrong and what is the correct behavior of a system. This conversation should really involve many stakeholders, not only the people who really understand technology, not only the government, but I do believe even the population, the ones who are affected from the system. Interrogate the system, asking what's a desirable behavior and what's going to be an action that we are willing to take when this behavior does not seem to fit our moral definitions or our initial objectives.
Yeah, and I guess I would agree with everything that you say, Alessandra. I mean, I guess you know, when you start to bring in, as you do there, Brian, that international dimension, you know, all those challenges are kind of multiplied up, really, aren't they? And I think, you know, a lot of the issues around how we adopt AI are, you know, those challenges are shared. They're global challenges, and these are global forces. And so getting in and about that, and as Alessandra said, defining what good looks like, defining what right is, I think is the sort of fundamental first step. I mean, in our case, we set out really clearly what our values and principles are that should inform all of our decision making. And I think what we then have to do is look at how we operationalize those into the way that we adopt, deploy, and develop these technologies, in the full recognition that the way different societies do those things will be different and reflect their own, you know, cultural norms. And I think we do need to understand that. And even just you know, the way that the data recorded in different, for instance, you know, there's just so many differences that there's huge risks in just assuming that we can lift and shift stuff from one context to another, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's an important follow-up to that as well, which is a pretty similar question. But you know, a lot of our work together did focus at the fundamental level and really understanding all the potentials for bias. I was reminded when you were answering about the proposed EU AI regulation, and in particular the carve out for high quality data. And if you were to assess your data to be of high quality, you actually kind of got a pass, you know, in some situations. And the follow-up is there such a thing as high quality data? Can we get to high quality? Do we have to wait till we get to high quality? Again, this is for both of you, because there's a technical implication as much as there is a logistic and societal implication of actually collecting the data.
I guess that is all relative, that the high quality is probably subject to the goals we want to achieve, our principle, and the purpose of the system we want to build. Certain data might be good enough for a certain application, but not high quality for another one. So that definition, might be quite difficult to provide, in my opinion. I would be highly satisfied with the definition of high quality data, I think.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. Quality is a function of the application, isn't it? But I think what that tells us is that as much as it can be quite exciting to focus on the end product, the investment in data, and in particular in making sure that we understand our data, that it's well described, that the standards that are applied to it, make it consumable, all of those kind of dimensions, those fundamentals of data engineering really then enable us to understand our data better and to make better judgments about when it's fit for purpose and when it meets the needs of a particular application. I guess the approach that we're taking here in Scotland is really around recognizing that whilst our AI strategy, I guess, talks about how we adopt those technologies, the digital strategy that we launched actually alongside the AI strategy really addresses the issues about how we get the fundamentals, if you like, of our data infrastructure right, and develop a data transformation framework to help our public bodies do that in really actionable ways. So I guess, coming back around to it, Brian, to say, I think it's a function of I would agree with Alessandra, the application, and the key thing there is that, the data is understood, well described, and valued as an asset, really.
On the data side, I might chip in with a positive note. Most often the debate of good quality data and bad quality data is always connected to the bad use of citizens' data and violations of privacy. Most of the time people equate data sharing with how my data will be used for commercial purpose. I don't want to violate my privacy. That's not always the case. It's important to explain. It's important that the data owners, so the citizens in general, anyone, understands how the data are collected and how the data will be used, because they can be really used for the benefit of the individuals and of the society. And that's really important to make this process transparent, to help society progressing and achieving great goals, and not have the lack of transparency to be a blocker to data sharing and information sharing.
Excellent. Excellent. I want to leave a few minutes at the end for questions from the audience. So I'll ask one more question. And that's, as we have discussed the problems with the bias, with the data, the importance of engaging with the population, Albert, what do you see the next big challenge that you have to get right to do AI in the public sector? What's the next one that we're going to have to look at?
I guess I think possibly the big one for me is about skills and understanding. So not just technical skills, but actually just literacy around AI and its applications. And I think the reason that is really, really important is that it's additional to the development of these technologies and deployment, but it's the thing which is going to empower our workers to work in collaboration with AI, right? So an understanding of how the strengths and weaknesses of these technologies, that, for example, when you get an insight from one of these systems, it's a piece of information. It's not an outcome in itself, and you need to weigh that information alongside other information. So I think for me, I think that those skills of our our entire workforce, our entire population, our understanding of it is really important thing to approach, and probably one of the fundamentals. The challenges around transparency, accountability, and ultimately redress that empower and engage citizens are all things we're facing into. But again, I think the deeper understanding of these technologies helps us to solve these problems in ways that support our population, our workforce, and lead to better outcomes.
Well, it's exciting, and it's really an important use of the technology. Let's take a few questions from the audience. the first one, going back to criminality detection, is part of the problem the absence of a solid scientific basis for the relationships that are analyzed between facial features and criminal tendencies. And I think I'll take that one, and either of you feel free to jump in afterwards. But absolutely, if we didn't make it clear, the first jump was the idea that those things could actually be equated to each other, and it was probably a fundamentally flawed pursuit at the very basic level, and add on to that the more specific technological limitations that we should be skeptical in any application that Alessandra mentioned. Just really paints a very clear picture that that's not the direction the technology can do, and absolutely we should not be taking the actions with the assumption that AI is magic and can do anything. And feel free to jump in if I didn't make it clear enough, or if you wanted to add any points to that.
I would agree very much with what you say. Not only the connection between facial features and criminality, but also other behaviors and societal features that are often used to detect these outcomes. So yes, there's no scientific evidence that there is a connection, and that's a very first mistake at the very beginning of our reasoning when we interrogate the goal and the system. We start with the wrong assumptions.
Difficult to add to that, because I think you guys have said it really well. So yeah, completely agree.
Excellent. Time for one more. Isn't there good positive bias we should hold on to, such as things like ethnicity, to ensure they're not overlooked?
I might say I wouldn't define it as positive bias, but I would say that, for example, when you have a population where certain ethnicities are underrepresented, you should definitely balance your data samples, collecting data towards making sure that those unrepresented ethnicities, so those very few data points compared to the very many others, are not overlooked. So that in that case, data collection should definitely take into account underrepresented data types, and that's whether this is then taken into account at the algorithmic and outcome level. That probably depends on the application and has to be evaluated case by case.
I would add just one thing to that, and that's from a system design standpoint. We see a lot of approaches that involve trying to just remove what people deem to be sensitive categories, things like gender and race, and that information is all over the rest of the data, and you can infer those things back from the other data points that you have, and taking a naive approach to trying to purge it from the data isn't the right approach. You can't remove bias. The best thing you can do is understand it and protect it from moving around, and try to understand where it might. And so just simply removing them doesn't give you the results that you're looking for. You need a more well orchestrated approach to understand where that bias is in the system, and to be able to take advantage of it and control it. That's all for time today. Thank you so much for coming. This was a great discussion. I really appreciated it.